I was working with a senior executive in Canberra a couple of years ago whose department was preparing a response for questions on notice to the Prime Minister's office. High pressure, high visibility, the kind of environment where every answer matters. At the time, I was coaching some of his senior leaders and suggested we run through some rehearsal and pressure testing before the important ministerial briefing. But he resisted it completely. And I still remember to this day him saying, "Why would I need coaching? I'm already an executive." He confused experience with preparation and confidence with competence. The briefing didn't go well, and honestly, it nearly ended his career. Welcome back to the Cognitive Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Ray, high-performance coach, speaker, and author of The Cognitive Athlete. And this is week 2 of season 3. Last week, we explored the knowing-doing gap, the difference between understanding something intellectually and actually being able to execute it under pressure. This week, we take one step further. Pressure does something interesting. It exposes patterns, defaults, automatic behaviours, and whether people realise it or not, everyone has a default response under pressure. Let's dive into it. What made that Canberra experience interesting wasn't just the briefing itself, it was what I observed every day beforehand. I was spending time coaching some of his senior leaders and sitting nearby in the office environment. And very quickly, a pattern became obvious. He usually started the day well, calm, measured, approachable. But as the day progressed and the pressure increased, his behaviour changed. His pace increased, patience shortened, emails become sharper, interruptions increased. As a result, his listening reduced. And eventually, the environment adapted around him. People would quietly check in with his EA. "How's he doing today?" If he was in a good mood, they'd approach him. However, if he was under pressure, people avoided him completely. And that's a really dangerous place for any leader to operate from. Because once people start managing the leader's emotional state instead of the work itself, psychological safety disappears. Now, intellectually, he was highly capable, very experienced, and technically strong. But technical capability and composure under pressure are not the same thing. And that was the real issue. Because when the pressure increased around that ministerial briefing, the behaviour deteriorated as well. He became more reactive, more defensive, and dismissive of preparations. And one of the biggest mistakes experienced professionals make is believing experience alone removes the need for rehearsal. Let me tell you something. It doesn't. At senior levels, preparation matters more, not less. You need to be over-prepared, if anything, not under-prepared. But he resisted coaching, didn't want to rehearse difficult questions, didn't want to pressure test his responses, didn't want any feedback. And when the real pressure arrived, the environment exposed exactly what hadn't been trained. The meeting became reactive, he lost structure, started responding emotionally instead of deliberately. And afterwards, the fallout was significant, to the point where it genuinely threatened his future in the role. And interestingly, that was the moment he finally became open to coaching. Not before, but after the consequences arrived. The real issue is pressure exposes patterns. This is one of the biggest misconceptions around performance under pressure. People think pressure creates behaviour. It doesn't. Pressure exposes behaviour. Under pressure, people default to what is automatic, not necessarily what is effective. And this is something military training understands exceptionally well. Training environments are designed to expose reactions early, not to embarrass people or break them, but to increase awareness. Because once you can start to see your reactions, you can start training different responses. That is the point of repetition. That's the point of rehearsal, and that is the point of pressure testing. You expose the pattern first, then you train the response repeatedly until it becomes more deliberate under pressure. And cognitively, the same thing applies in leadership and business. Some people speed up under pressure, some people become emotionally reactive, some avoid conflict, some stop listening properly, and some catastrophize situations. And often, people don't even realize they're doing it. One thing I regularly notice with leaders is their language changes under pressure. Everything becomes a disaster, a complete nightmare, completely out of my control, urgent, or critical. The language escalates, the nervous system escalates, and eventually the behavior escalates too. That's why awareness matters so much, because once you can identify the trigger and the reaction, you can start interrupting the pattern earlier. This is what cognitive athletes do differently. They train awareness under pressure, not because they feel stress, not because they're naturally calm, but because they've spent time observing their triggers, their reactions, their behavioral drift under pressure. And once behavior becomes visible, it becomes trainable. That's the shift. Not becoming perfect under pressure, becoming more aware under pressure. So let's make this super practical. This week is about recognizing your default patterns under pressure. And honestly, this is one of the first things I do with every executive coaching client I work with. So grab a notebook or open a notes app and start observing yourself properly. Not judging, but really observing. You've got 3 actions this week. Action number 1, identify your pressure triggers. What situations constantly change your behavior? Maybe it's a difficult conversation, competing priorities, public pressure, maybe a bit of conflict, tight deadlines, fatigue late in the day. Just identify the trigger. Action number 2, identify your default response. When pressure increases, what changes first? Is it your pace? Does it speed up? Maybe your tone changes, you interrupt more, maybe you stop listening properly, or you rush decisions, or maybe you exaggerate situations, and then your language becomes more dramatic. Start noticing these patterns, because awareness always comes before adjustment. Action number 3, rehearse a better response. Before a pressure moment this week, pause beforehand and ask, how do I want to show up? What behavior am I training? It could be slowing your pace down, pausing before answering, listening fully, maybe it's even staying structured, and remaining composed. Don't rely on intention. What you need to do is rehearse it beforehand. And here's an important rule for week number 2. Do not aim to eliminate pressure from your work. Pressure is part of performance. The goal is becoming more deliberate inside it. Under pressure, people rarely rise to the level of their intention. They default to the level of their training. So let's bring this together. Last week, we explored the knowing-doing gap. This week, we explored what pressure actually exposes. Those patterns, the defaults, those automatic behaviors under pressure. Once you can start to recognize your default responses, you can start training different ones. Next week, we move into decision making. Pressure changes decision quality quickly, and most professionals are making most important decisions when their cognitive bandwidth is already depleted. We'll unpack that next week. And finally, if this episode has resonated with you, hit follow or subscribe. It genuinely helps grow the podcast and get it in front of those people who need it the most. And if someone came to mind while listening, share it with them. Pressure doesn't create behavior, it exposes it. Thanks for listening. And remember, under pressure, people default to what has been trained. See you next time.